Welcome. This video is going to be about a topic I've created called conceptual churn. I also have a draft of something on Substack about this already. So let's dive right in. Basically, the idea of conceptual churn, before I get into the screen share rambling, is the idea of conceptual churn is that we can get very attached to certain concepts. So one example for me is capitalism. People always like to talk about changing things up, like whatever, radical politics, blah. I'm into it, but I'm not so sure I go along with the idea of capitalism. So it makes me notice because I don't really go along with the word. It makes me especially notice, I think, that people just say a word a lot, like capitalism or fascism, it also applies to things like man and woman. Like I'm not just talking about leftoids or whatever, like any concept, right? This is sort of across the board. I remind myself of Norm Macdonald being like, the Germans declared as their enemy the world, and then as part of conceptual churn, right, we can get into looking at the concept of the world, for example, through the lens of Afro-pessimism or some other form of phenomenology. Let's dive right into conceptual churn. I'm going to start up a new window here because my old one is full of the links from the last one. So let's see. I'm going to go right back to Baudrillard again. Is a major inspiration for this idea of conceptual churn. As I mentioned in that previous video on enchodification. Oh dear. So what is it? One by one. So what I think is so interesting about the end of the preface, or one of the things I think is so interesting about the end of the preface to Symbolic Exchange and Death, which is a book by Jean Baudrillard, right, from 1976. What I think is so interesting about this very end of the preface is that Baudrillard is basically saying that some of his own key terms, right, so that might be, Baudrillard has a whole book called Passwords. I forget if I even have that one on, I don't think I even have that one on my collection. But Baudrillard has a book called Passwords, which is another different way of talking about this idea of like key terms, right? So like right here, just so you can see it exists. See, it exists. But so yeah, I'm not sure if I even have Passwords here. I don't think so. Yeah, so Passwords is actually one of Baudrillard's books that I'm missing. But anyway, you have key terms. And so some of Baudrillard's key terms are the code and the symbolic. So Baudrillard is saying that he wants to extract them from discourse. So to be able to talk about things that matter without using the code and the symbolic. So let's see, where's Baudrillard in terms of doing this? The code comes up 119 times. And the symbolic, it comes up in a lot of different ways too, but as the symbolic 135 times, and symbolic is mentioned 340 times, right? And then outside of the code, 219, right? That also counts other forms that don't look exactly like that. The point is, though, Baudrillard is talking about like having his own favorite words to use and trying to rip them out. And so where this got to for me was also just, again, a very long-standing frustration with, getting bottomed out in words, like we're talking about capitalism. And it's like, we think that in order to do something that's worthwhile, first we need to define capitalism, or we need to define, all the different ways that it works or something. And it's like, well, once you get into this sort of definition, you're going to realize there's a lot of issues with it. But so the way that people deal with that is just never to have those conversations, right? The way people deal with the fact that we don't want to question our terms is that we just don't question them. And whenever anybody starts to, we bring up some, anti-intellect, we create some slur, right? We come up with some word that just makes it seem like, oh, that person's questioning terms that are so obvious, ha ha ha. Like it's the kind of thing when people, right, start to question gender norms, because I try to be equal opportunity when it comes to this, basically, because this is a problem with all terms, not just some terms, right? This is like where people bring up the idea of projection. It's like we can see other people doing this, but we can't see ourselves doing this. That's in a way the issue, which is that we can see how other people get stuck in their words, but we don't it's harder for us to see how we get stuck in ours. So in terms of conceptual churn, it's also, I have this term called, it's another thing I need to bring up, the transconceptual. Because, again, back to Baudrillard, in The Transparency of Evil, Baudrillard elaborates this philosophy of trans. It comes up a lot. I'm going to go with trans politics. So it's because, different spheres are melting into each other, right? Everything is sexual, everything is political, everything is aesthetic. Baudrillard only goes into a few terms here, but this applies to all terms. Everything is a chud, everything's a woman, everything's a man, like everything's a game, everything is a sport, everything is a war, everything is peace, like that's basically what happens when I don't know, it's like we're cranking up, we're in the process of de-chudification, we're in the process of basically, the glory of God is like going to be forcibly revealed to us. And that's it reminds me of like when like a nuclear bomb goes off or something and like everything turns white and or you turn up the exposure on an image, right? And so some of the details start to wash out. And so like the process of like the true truth being revealed, which is beyond all categories, including truth, right? The part of that, like coming to saturate our awareness, is like the overwhelming and the making indistinct some of our distinctions. You can also think about it like water is flooding. When the ocean rises up above the ground, that's a line from California, a song. So when that happens, all the terrain is covered up. So it used to be, oh, look, all this difference. Look at all this. This is a hill and a valley. And it's like, well, now it's underwater. And people can be like, oh, okay, well, those differences are still there. They're just covered over. And it's like, okay, but I mean, like, how often do you think about the different levels of land underwater? Anyway, I'm not doing a very good job. So, but the point is that like just things that we think are so important as distinctions wind up fading away in the course of development. That's basically my supposition. And then you can think about it in terms of just overcoming these sorts of distinctions mentally, like thinking about people in terms of cool and lame, I mean, obviously some people never really get past this. And in a way, maybe we all don't, back to estratification. But, like some people in school would be like, oh, those people are nerds. But then like later on, you're still a bro or whatever. You're still not a big studier. You're, whatever. But you realize like, oh, we want lawyers to be around. And maybe you still like think of them as nerds. But anyway, it's like it's different, right? Because the distinction that you made in your mind of like, oh, that person's not cool, we don't need to associate with them. You basically come to realize that people are complex and things fit together in a complex way. And so like you've got to get past some of these early distinctions that we make. And basically what I'm saying is all distinctions are like that. Okay, but then the issue is that how are we going to talk about things if we don't use terms? It reminds me of this song. It's called, or it goes, how am I supposed to breathe with no air? So this is not actually what I want. It wants to open up a tab, and it's like that tab is on a different window. So I don't know how you think that's good enough. But so what was it that I wanted to share here? I feel like it might have been pretty recent. Yeah, it was. So there's post-genderism. It's something about creating concept handles. Yeah, this was actually really interesting. So, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Can I go to the post? I don't understand how I guess I have to go here. So basically this person came up with this idea, you have a concept handle. It's a way of like referring to something, right? So it's talking about the idea of being really good at sort of like coming up with a meme, but you're coming up with, a catchy handle or way of talking about a complex idea that you're talking about. So this person is saying like there's, it's really useful to have them, right? Because it's the difference between being able to talk about something and not being able to, like if you have a word for it or not, right? Like this is what these people are talking about. People have been talking about this idea for a long time. They're not calling it concept handle, and they often caution that summing up a complex topic with a catchy phrase very often leads to bastardizing our conception of the thing that we're talking about. So again, this is part of estratification. I also have a scholarly source on this. And this person says, always, right? So words are always causing misunderstandings, but the alternative is to not use words. So that's a problem. So back to the overall heading, for example, of experimental unit, it's like we have to do emergency response, right? The only reason why we need to use concepts is because we have emergencies. There's things that we want to do. That's why we need words. If there was nothing to do, there'd be nothing to talk about. And doing includes like modifying our understandings, like getting to know somebody. That is an emergency. Like, how do I explain myself to you, right? What are some of the first things that I say when I start to introduce myself? Like, that counts as an emergency in what I'm talking about. It's just like we have, I guess what I would say is it's an emergent. Maybe it's also related to what Husserl says about intention, right? It's like we have some purpose. We imagine some purpose, but that already... we have to articulate that to ourselves in some terms, or we have to have some impulse, like we have hunger, right? But so we don't have a word. It's not a word, right? It's just we have a feeling. But hunger is probably one of the earliest words because it's something that comes up a lot. And it's something that people want to talk about. I'm hungry, right? So there's a way in which, we could have a misunderstanding. Like if I say I'm hungry, that's how it relates to how we use words as metonyms for each other, or metaphors, although we don't really go along with that, following basically a theory of omni-metonymy set out, or total metonymy set out by Baudrillard here, basically saying that conceptual domains are collapsing into each other. It has something else to do with conceptual churn, just because it's like concepts they basically fail. They don't work the way that we think they do, and even conceptual domain is one of those. And so like the idea of there being discrete domains breaks down, again, as it's like you're turning up the saturation of divinity. That's like sort of what it means that our society is coming up on an acid trip or whatever. So, or like acid communism or whatever. It's like whatever you want. It's just like, distinctions are being faded out as we like basically tap in more directly to the power of being or whatever. And this is something which is happening emotionally, spiritually, and technologically all at the same time. And it also looks like a bunch of people arguing over things. And slowly, people are changing our mind, right? So that's, again, conceptual churn. And I think it's something to say, it's important to say that this is already happening, even as we might want to say we want to accelerate this process, you could say. Like, people do go through this. So, like, say you're a Christian, right? You might continue to believe in Jesus Christ or whatever, but exactly what that means to you will be subtly shifting. And one of the ways that you can see that has to do with, you could almost think about like word association, like a word cloud, like in, I can just show you. Oh my goodness. Like, how does Yahoo show you images? Like, how does, you have to like go down. No, like, you just don't have image search? It's like, how the hell is Yahoo even alive? Like, it's so ridiculous. Anyway, so this is basically, the idea is, a word will be bigger the more times it's used. So say, in terms of, to illustrate like our conceptual churn, like imagine Queen as Jesus Christ or something. We're talking about being Christians. And so, what our conceptual churn could look like is like Jesus can remain the biggest, term, but the terms around it could be changing. So like you could go from being a Catholic to a Protestant, for example. So you could have like Pope could be really big or whatever, Rome. But then, once you get away from that, it could be something else. It could be limited atonement. It could be, whatever. What does Jesus Christ mean to you? What's your favorite term mean to you? Another good example is America. It's actually a really good thing from. So I want to keep that up, actually. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm stuck on Yahoo. Like, I just want to. Oh my goodness. Like, Yahoo just needs to be abolished so nobody can make this mistake of going there. Let's see. Google. What was I saying? Oh yeah, word cloud. And then over here, I wanted to say, what kind of American are you? That's from Civil War, right? And so the thing is, this is actually good. Like, people think this has everything to do with everything, right? Because it's like, just this shows that it's not enough just to have the same allegiance, right? It's not enough just to love Jesus or to love America or whatever. It's like, what does that mean to you, though? And it's like, we're going to basically test you to see whether you really get it or not. And maybe if you don't get it, like, you're going to be anathema. But so as part of conceptual churn, you can think about that even more broadly, where it's like the kind of American or whatever the term is that we latch onto. I'm a man, I'm a person, I'm a human. The kind of whatever it is that we are is constantly changing. And that's part of conceptual churn, even though our attachment to a core concept is not changing. Again, go back to the word cloud. Like, and this also is part of, I mean, it's something about Saussurean linguistics. It's basically the idea that words get their meanings from their relationship to other words. And you can also relate this to dependent origination. So this is, again, basically saying things don't have their essences in themselves. Things are being caused by other things. And so everything is interpenetrative. Everything is affecting each other. And so when we use terms, one way that, let's see, I just really like to go back to this again and again. In Beyond the Pale, right, one of the things that Ben Zweibelsen associates with a Newtonian style of way of looking at things that Ben Zweibelsen thinks is important to overcome is that in Newtonianism, human reality, again, human reality should be in quotation marks because human and reality. Anyway, that's the idea where like using these words gets us too fixated. Like we think we know what we mean by human, or we think we know what we mean by reality. And so these concepts are profoundly misleading. It actually relates to the Orders of Simulacra from Baudrillard. Let's see if we can find this. Oh, okay. So basically, symbols that have become without reference. But so the point is, no, the point of this is that like you have a symbol which is hiding the fact that there is no like hard and fast reality underneath it. So it's not like a simple lie where somebody is saying like, oh, you're a human being, but in reality, right, we're really spiritual entities from the seventh dimension or something. And so to call us human is to be, it's masking the reality or something. As opposed to that, what I'm saying is like these sorts of terms, they're masking that there is no basic way to talk about things. And so like there is like, it's not that there's a problem with the term reality. And so we need to keep using, like, we need to find more words that work better, that are more accurate, because getting fixed within any one single definition of any one word is going to be misleading, basically. So that's why we need to continually operate by conceptual churn. And that especially means that our key concepts need to be overturned. So basically I apply this standard to, political philosophy or whatever. If I just notice that people just repeat the same terms, it's like we keep talking about nation states like Russia and America or whatever. It's like you just keep talking about these things and not critically examining what they are. I basically don't think that you're capable of intelligence. You know what I mean? Or the other thing to say would be that, you have a more advanced understanding or whatever, or you understand that attachment to certain terms can be misleading, but, you still use terms with other people. And you're not allowing those to churn. Or maybe the thing to say, because basically what I'm saying is, people who are inside the United States government know that there's no such thing as the United States government, right? But they can't talk that way because that will dispel the illusion. But maybe there is a way, basically, in which, people who are seeding discourse, they are doing conceptual churn. Like you could see how, like in movies and whatever, like there's more and more philosophy which is being mentioned. And this is the kind of thing people think is like the destruction of Western civilization. But that's because they don't understand like what they're talking about, and they don't understand that, more interesting philosophy than they, deign to acknowledge has been part of what they consider to be their cultural tradition, from time immemorial. So anyway, that's a little bit of a point of contention with me. The kind of people who, act like I would be a threat, like I'm trying to undermine Western civilization or something. It's like that doesn't exist. And the best part of what you're talking about is like closer to my way of thinking anyway. Getting very upset here. But like, again, to wrap this just into this idea of conceptual churn, like this sort of idea, this recognition that terms can be limited and that things go on and change, like a good example of this would be Heraclitus, right? Heraclitus talks about this kind of thing. It's just that like the pace of change has accelerated to the point where like our language needs to overturn itself much more rapidly. We're stuck on terms like national sovereignty or democracy as though they mean anything, and they don't, right? So the important way to like cut through all this chaff is basically like whenever you use a term that is like too overused, you really need to reframe it. You need to rephrase it. And probably like it would be like I should do this to myself, and in a way I do. Like what I'm showing you is the product of me doing this for a long time. I need to continue to do it, of course. It would probably be easier to do with another person when they can flag something, because it's hard for me to like fully understand when I'm overusing a term. But oh yeah, JAWS design exercise. There's another really grounded way to talk about conceptual churn, which is this JAWS exercise. The idea is basically that you're given a really famous story, and then you are told to like, you are told to express the story in a few images. And then so after you do that, then you discuss why you did it that way. And then you have to do it again, but you can't use the images that you used the first time. So obviously this will give you more information, and no surprise, this is Ben Weibelson, who is going to be talking about it. Anyway, so that's this. Anyway, that's the same person as this, by the way. So like, so what I was, anyway, I never got to this part over here that, part of the perspective that Ben Weibelson, who's in the army, right, thinks we need to overcome is the idea that there's discrete entities with distinct properties. Like, the idea that there's discrete entities with distinct properties is basically like, it's not true. And so anything which is acting like that is like easily the case and simply is a house built on sand. It is completely intellectually inadequate, right? Like, I'm sorry for getting angry like this, but like the reason why this is happening is that like my like passion, my urge, my yearning for conceptual churn and moving past these words that people just like use reflexively and refuse to investigate further. This is something that has been a constant source of displeasure and self-doubt for me, like since I have been coming of age, and so it is something that I think needs to be addressed directly and in a way with extreme prejudice, right? Like, anyway, I'm getting mad again. But so basically the point is here, like this is good cop. So this is basically what it's trying to tell you is that like we can enhance our creativity, right? If we deny ourselves our first choice when it comes to like how we would choose to express ourselves. I'm realizing I look like Nixon in a debate. I need to wipe my forehead or something. But like if we deny ourselves our first choice, then we can actually even just learn how to be our position better. Because I think there's really no distinction between being converted between positions to like a correct position, which is good for everybody. There's no difference between that and, improving our position to where like we still feel like we're ourselves, but we've leveled up, and we've just leveled up in a way that allows other people, that we're leveling up with other people. And all of a sudden, like things are working out better. So yeah, this is a more good cop, not so emotional way of talking about it. And so again, it's just this idea of denying yourself your first choice. So you're learning to express yourself with deeper cuts. Another aspect that I want to make sure and mention, because anyway, true diehards will probably listen to what I'm saying and they'll probably think it's really funny how I get mad. But anyway, that's fine. Okay, so is this... Okay, so now we're talking about Percy Shelley. So the problem is this guy is writing in like the early 1800s, so it's the kind of thing people today don't understand. But, that's your problem. I'm going to let you puzzle through it. So Percy Shelley writes, "In the youth of the world, men dance and sing and imitate natural objects, observing in these actions, as in all others, a certain rhythm or order. And, although all men observe a similar, they observe not the same order, in the motions of dance, in the melody of song, in the combinations of language, in the series of their imitations of natural objects. For there is a certain order or rhythm belonging to each of these classes of mimetic representation, from which the hearer and the spectator receive an intenser and purer pleasure than from any other. The sense of an approximation to this order has been called taste by modern writers. Every man in the infancy of art observes an order which approximates more or less closely to that from which this highest delight results. But the diversity is not sufficiently marked, as that its gradations should be sensible, except in those instances where the predominance of this faculty of approximation to the beautiful, for so we may be permitted to name the relation between this highest pleasure and its cause, is very great. Those in whom it exists in excess are poets, in the most universal sense of the word, and the pleasure resulting from the manner in which they express the influence of society or nature upon their own minds communicates itself to others and gathers a sort of reduplication from that community. Their language is vitally metaphorical. That is, it marks the before unapprehended relations of things and perpetuates their apprehension until the words which represent them become, through time, signs for portions or classes of thoughts instead of pictures of integral thoughts. And then, if no new poets should arise to create afresh the associations which have been thus disorganized, language will be dead to all the nobler purposes of human intercourse. These similitudes or relations are finally said by Lord Bacon to be, quote, the same footsteps of nature impressed upon the various subjects of the world, unquote. And he considers the faculty which perceives them as a storehouse of axioms common to all knowledge. In the infancy of society, every author is necessarily a poet because language itself is poetry. And to be a poet is to apprehend the true and the beautiful. In a word, the good, which exists in the relation, subsisting first between existence and perception, and secondly between perception and expression. Every original language near to its source is in itself the chaos of a cyclic poem. The copiousness of lexicography and the distinctions of grammar are the works of a later age and are mere catalog in the form of the creation of poetry. I mean, obviously there's a lot of this in terms of conceptual churn, like I would pick out, like the idea of truth, and basically what Shelley's talking about here is like, isn't it so nice that like we can see things and then perceive them? Like there's a way the door is, and because I perceive it in a way, I can use the door. That has everything to do with how I'm, how the door really is, and how I perceive it, and then how I feel like I can express myself. It's all working together. That's amazing. And so the ability to sort of give names to things and create rhythms and imitations. Shelley's basically talking about how we do art by imitating nature or whatever. So our ability to do that, anyway, it's sort of like a reference. It's sort of like when we get really hyped up about a meme, because a new meme, it really captures like what it is that we're talking about. That's, again, going back to this idea of concept handles. The whole idea is I've got many ideas in my head that I can sum up in a nice essay, and people like my writing, but it would be so useful to be able to sum up the ideas with a single catchy word. So this person is like trying to figure out a science for, coming up with a catchy like handle for something. Anyway, that's sort of what Shelley's talking about here. But crucially, what's important is that Shelley is talking about sort of degradation. So it marks the before unapprehended relations of things. So think stuff's going on, and maybe there's some stuff people can't see. So on the one hand, to be a poet, in order to have or to create a scientific innovation, right? You've got to, in a way, see something that nobody else saw before. So what you're going to do is you're going to see something nobody else saw before, and then you're going to give it a name, and you're going to be able to explain it to people so that, you will show it to them, and all of a sudden they can see what it is that you were talking about, and you give it a name, and that means that people can just remember the name. And then anytime we say the name, right, we remember what it was that we were talking about. And so all of a sudden, this thing that we saw before becomes something that anybody can see all the time. And we can draw that back with memory. So the issue, though, is the words that represent them, which is to say, like the stuff we're trying to talk about, right? The words that represent the stuff that we're trying to talk about become, over time, signs for portions or classes of thoughts instead of pictures of integral thoughts. So this is a really interesting idea. I forgot that integral comes up here. It reminds me of the integrated spectacle and integrated reality from integrated spectacle from Debord's comments and integrated reality from Jean Baudrillard, but whatever. But I think in terms of integral thoughts, the idea is just like if you're expressing something in poetry or just some like sublime, like experience that you've had, like what that is like an integral thought. It's like it's something that involves not just concepts, but emotions, embodiment, all this sort of shit. Whereas like the idea for portions or classes of thoughts is that you could talk about it in terms of like, this is intellectualization. And then in a way, there's nothing wrong with the intellect in itself. But like, imagine just thinking about something, you're thinking about physics, just, trying to solve a formula or something like that. I guess maybe not the formula, because you can have a very deep relationship to a formula. So that's not really what it's about. But basically, a more formulaic or routine, procedure of engaging with science versus imagine trying to do that like on psilocybin or something. So it's like, wow, all of a sudden you're really contemplating like what it means that things are made of atoms, as opposed to just trying to find like the right number. On the other hand, any process of just trying to find the right number or something is eventually like it's tied in with metaphysical subtleties. So that basically gets into later Baudrillard talking about how every system is a symbolic system. And it also gets into here, he's saying language is poetry. We just forgot, right? So there is no, what to say. Everybody is a poet. Like we all do conceptual churn all the time anyway. We constantly experience this problem where, we use words and we expect it to work out the way we don't, and it doesn't. So now we have to search for more words. We have to explain what we meant. And so what I'm saying is conceptual churn is my conceptual handle, right, for talking about how we need to, in general, move past our conceptual handles. So funnily enough, right, conceptual churn is itself one of these things. So let's look up, like one way to do that is to work with synonyms, right? So we can look at concept in terms of synonyms. So we want to change our concepts. What's a concept? Well, our notions, our propositions, our worldview is what I just thought of. Our platitudes, right? Or as Ben Zweibelsen would say, sacred cows. Ben Zweibelsen has a video where he's like, we need to be knee deep in sacred cow blood, right? And that's an unfortunate reference to, it's like Saratana Dharma or something. Maybe that can help me. Sanatana Dharma. Although, yeah, I need to ask my organization partner. But anyways, it's an unfortunate, like sacred cow is actually, that's another example of where we should do conceptual turn, right? Where, because sacred cow, I mean, talking about sacred cow blood, you're invoking like killing things and like, letting them bleed like that. There's no real need to do that. And also it's culturally insensitive, perhaps, because the whole idea, I think, comes from the fact that people influenced by Sanatana Dharma or things like that could be, like they worship cows, right? And so it's like, why do we have to talk about sacred cows, right? There's all sorts of references that we could make to the kinds of attachments that people are very loath to give up. So let's see if we have more for sacred cow. Golden calf, hero, idol. That's good. Sensitive issue, protected interest, right? So when we talk about sacred cow blood, that would be actually a really good thing. There's not going to be synonyms for sacred cow blood, but what it means is sort of like the essence that comes after we've sacrificed, right? So that's why we want to be in that. So it's like we want to be, it's almost like the twilight of idols, right? Like in Nietzsche. Like all this is, again, also very related to Nietzsche. Nietzsche has a criticism of concepts. Yeah, this is something that I would really like to oh yeah, treat unequal as if equal. I might be able to find the passage because I know that has yeah, I guess it's in Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, cool, right, I did it. So Nietzsche is writing, it is in this way with all of us concerning language. We believe that we know something about the things themselves when we speak of trees, colors, snow, and flowers, and yet we possess nothing but metaphors for things. And this is funny because, this is where Baudrillard comes to intervene and say that, no, we don't have, I think he says, this is so great. Metonymy has built its house upon the disillusion of metaphor. It's awesome. So basically, it's just funny. But anyway, we possess nothing but metonyms for things, metonyms which correspond in no way to the original entities. In the same way that the sound appears as a sand figure, so the mysterious X of the thing in itself first appears as a nerve stimulus, then as an image, and finally as a sound. Note also X, experimental unit, hello! Thus, the genesis of language does not proceed logically in any case, all the material within and with which the man of truth, the scientist, and the philosopher later work and build if not derived from Never Never Land, is at least not derived from the essence of things. Also, reference to Neverland is fucking LOL. Like, this is one of my favorite passages of philosophy ever, and it mentions Never Neverland. Fucking hilarious. Anyway, in particular, let us further consider the formation of concepts. Every word instantly becomes a concept precisely insofar as it is not supposed to serve as a reminder of the unique and entirely individual original experience to which it owes its origin. And oh my goodness, have you ever heard of this thing called great minds think alike? Because let's go right back over here. That's exactly, Nietzsche's just saying it in a clearer way, right? So, think about what Shelley's talking about you could think about a poet comes up with, instead of calling it a concept, it's still a phrase, right? It's just like a word phrase, like, I don't know. There's a poem that my ex-wife parent liked, which went like, I felt a cleavage in the brain as though my mind had split or something. It's like, okay. So it's like, whatever that means. And then you could have like migraine headache, but like migraine headache is a concept. Whereas, I felt a cleavage in my brain as though my mind had split. Like that could be about a headache or not, but let's say it or whatever. But like that is like a poetic idea as opposed to a concept. Anyway, that could probably be worked out better. Anyway, so remember again, Percy Shelley was saying, okay, their language is vitally metaphorical. And again, Nietzsche's also talking about metaphors here, right? But so poets' language is vitally metaphorical. It marks the before unapprehended relations of things and perpetuates their apprehension. So like, what does that mean? The relations of things. So actually Nietzsche is more advanced because Shelley is very, what shall we say, naive when it comes to like, oh, well, we observe things that are happening and then we get names. But like Shelley is more advanced in the sense of like what Shelley considers something that's happening also includes very complicated emotions and combinations between emotional, intellectual, spiritual, political, whatever sorts of like experiences. So anyway, Shelley is a bit, anyway, everybody's a chud, right? But like each of these thinkers has their own limitations, not that, including me. So not that I can necessarily say what they are, but anyway. That happens until the word that the poet chooses. So like a poet, I felt a cleavage in my brain. What's another one? Like Percy Shelley actually came up with the term, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So that started off as a thing in a poem, but now that's a concept, right? And there's so many different like ways that we can get stuck in what that means. Anyway, so when that happens, the words that represent them become through time signs for portions or classes of thoughts instead of pictures of integral thoughts. So I'm not thinking about like the lived experience or whatever of the rich getting richer and the poor getting, all of a sudden I'm thinking like, oh well, that's socialism, and I'm for or against socialism. It's like all of a sudden like this becomes a talking point, this becomes a weaponized concept, right? This becomes not overdetermined, but the way we use this becomes very influenced by the way that we think about it. So you can also distinguish this between like the natural attitude and like epoche in phenomenology, where it's like our natural attitude is to think that, oh yeah, we have names for everything that matters and we can figure everything out. And in reality, we're lost in the sauce. We're lost in our concepts. And so epoche is something from Pyrrhonism, but it's also in, bracketing phenomenology. It's also in this. So it's basically like set aside all your concepts and just take it in. And again, think about a drug experience or think about an overwhelming music experience, the kind of thing which is beyond words. In a way, this is the kind of thing everybody understands to be true. It's just that then we come back from the acid trip and we start like pounding the table for some concept like Marxism or capitalism or America or whatever. And we forget that the sublime is beyond all these concepts, and our being attached to them is sort of like the monkey with its hand stuck in a jar, where it's like, we're so attached, the monkey trap, I guess this is what we're so attached to something that we can't get free of it, right? So we're trying to save, something that's in our hand, but the way in which we're holding it is itself holding us back. Anyway, but so I'm still trying to talk about how Shelley and Friedrich Nietzsche are talking about the same thing. So when, by integral thoughts, I'm basically saying when Percy Shelley says integral thoughts, it means basically something similar to, as Friedrich Nietzsche is saying, the unique and entirely individual original experience to which it owes its origin, right? So you have an original experience and then you give it a name. But so that name is a word that becomes a concept, then it's not supposed to serve as a reminder, but rather a word becomes a concept insofar as it simultaneously has to fit countless more or less similar cases. And again, we're back here to problem of universals, right? And like, this is the kind of thing, like, you can watch like a bunch of people on YouTube being like complete chuds. Anyway, like, everybody's a chud, but like, people will just try to shut this down and be like, but, obviously it can't be right because then, Jesus Christ, we couldn't think about Jesus Christ the same way, or like, it undermines, our moral values or whatever. Like, people basically say they're basically fear mongering because, like, they're basically, it sounds like you're going to be evil if you think about philosophy, if you question the terms that things have been put to you, if you acknowledge the obvious reality that, like, the world can't be summed up in a little concept, right? And the way in which we get conceptual churn is basically being able to let go from the monkey trap. Because as long as you are so fixated and like you have to think about everything in terms of this, again, we're back to, what is it, the law of the instrument or something? It's like a special version of the law of the instrument. I think this is what it is, where the instrument that we're talking about is a concept. So again, we're back to like conceptualization. We're back to, because we're not just talking about a concept like that, but we're talking about a concept of operations, right? Which conops, right? So we're doing military theory, right? We're all sovereigns or whatever, right? We're all generals. Like, our brain is the general of our body, and the concepts that we operate are basically the concepts within our ontologies. So that's where you could talk about like social ontology. This has this, and it's also similar to what sociological paradigms. It's also what what's his name? Ben Zweibelsen talks about as a social paradigm, I believe. Yeah, actually, social paradigm theory is one subdiscipline. So yeah, so like a social paradigm is you could think about it as a constellation of concepts, right? But in that sense, it's just a larger concept in the sense that it's a concept of operations. And maybe there's a way in which we all have to have many different concepts of operations. Like, I'm attached to a religion, or whatever. Like, I gotta follow Jesus. But then it's like, well, if I gotta, get somewhere, I have a different concept of operations where I use Google Maps and get in my car or whatever. And like that, I can conceive of that as part of a larger concept. This is where we're getting into the third concept that I'm talking about today, if I can, which is absolute exploit, which has to do with like, there's a certain concept that we have, like, you want to cook food, right? But cooking food could just be part of waging a war, right? Because in order to wage war, you're going to need to make food for the people who are going to fight. But then why are we waging war, right? Maybe even the idea of nationalism or religion could be higher than that, because a war is really just one conflict in order to, make the world safe for what, right? For what purpose? So then we can start getting into like evolutionary psychology, and that's obviously a really powerful concept or whatever constellation to overcome, because it's like, we get stuck in this idea of like, oh, well, I need to biologically reproduce. And it's like, no, like, that's not true. Like, we can subsume the entire world to our own purposes as artists. And like, you can consider that to be, oh my God, that's pathetic. Oh my God. But it's like the perspective from which like everything that other people like take for granted, like, oh, natalism, or, oh, you need to make money, or like, oh, you need to be respected, or whatever. You're like, oh, you don't have to, who cares? Like we seize on one metric, which is supposed to define like whether you're good or bad. And I failed your metric, so I'm bad. It's like, that is all basically not worth doing. Obviously, I do that as well. Even me saying that is me setting this sort of ultimatum. So yes, this is me acknowledging my chudliness. But anyways, we're continuing to do conceptual churn. Like, there is no way to present conceptual churn in a way which is perfect, because it describes an idea which needs to keep going on. So actually you can connect it in that sense to permanent revolution from what's his face, and we also Trotsky, and we also already talked about uneven and combined development on a different one, but it shows you uneven and combined development comes up a lot. But so that would be a good example where it's like, okay, what's another way to talk about uneven and combined development? Like, that's something we can't get too stuck on, that way of looking at things. Like, what, obviously there's a lot that goes into it, but like what more is there to say, right? permanent revolution. And then there's also, let's see if we can pull up David Hume right quick. So yeah, David Hume talks about a constant revolution of our ideas. Our imagination runs easily from one idea to any other that resembles it. So the issue is that we come up with rigid ways for labeling our ideas, and we get stuck in this. There's a whole host of things that get problematic here. For example, equivocation is like calling two different things by the same name. But then the question is like, we have to argue over whether two things are really two different kinds of things, or are they the same kind of thing, right? Are the Nazis like left or right, right? Like anytime we're doing this, like the stakes become incredibly charged, and we're dealing with the kind of thing where it's like we're trying to create groups of things and lump them together. But, you know, the stakes of that are incredibly high. But every individual term or concept that's involved in the argument is itself subject to being questioned in its own placement. And like any term can be replaced. Anyway, so it just creates a big old mess. And that's why it becomes very difficult to engage in like outside of good faith, because this is the sort of process which can easily be hijacked. So that's also why it's important for us to wonder, like, well, what is it that we're trying to do? That's again why. Oh, that's interesting. Like, I want to go back to greater jihad again. So it's interesting, like to think about the things that have come up, like greater jihad and uneven and combined development. Like, it's interesting to think about those things together, and it would be interesting to find like a sort of Muslim Trotskyist idea of that if it could exist. Anyway, we'll get there. What else did I want to show? But I wanted to show David Hume, like the idea of the constant revolution. Revolution is, does it come up more? Constant repetition. But yeah, constant revolution of our ideas. So conceptual churn, another way of talking about it, is a constant revolution of our ideas, so that like any label that we have for something, like we notice that we get too stuck. We use one word too much. So like it's like a way of talking about it would be like, I could look at the transcripts for my shows and pick out the top 10 words that I use the most often and not use them at all the next time. Or like make it the kind of thing where it's like I really have to like put what I'm saying into other words. And that basically leads it to a place where I'm not as dependent on that. Anyway, that's basically what conceptual churn is about. It's part of de-chutification. It's part of the process of us, you know, starting to move past the sort of local minima, you know, the things that have been good enough so far. But it's like, I'm talking to you. We got places to go, people. Okay, we got this is like what Baudrillard talks about. I don't know if I can figure it out. Oh my goodness gracious! Why would I want Baudrillard Studies? What a useless website compared to mine. Although I guess they have the International Journal. It's pretty cool. Anyway, what is it that I'm looking for? Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. I forgot what I wanted to tell you about. Oh, no, wait. No, I didn't. I know it's at least in here. This is what I wanted to show. Uh-oh. Conceptual churn. We got places to go. Right. So let's see if we can find this turbo in here. Yeah. Turbo should be taken literally in this expression. It means that the system as a whole is no longer driven by historical forces, but is absorbed by its final conditions, hastened to its definitive end like a turbo engine sucking in the space in front of it, creating a vacuum and a force of attraction in a vacuum. So compare that to the angel of history, according to Benjamin. I think, yeah, okay, we actually found it. Okay, cool. So it's basically like an angel looking through, about to move away from something. His face is turned toward the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it upon front of his feet. The angel would like to stay and make the whole what has been smashed, but the storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in its wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. The storm is what we call progress. And again, you can call it the fucking Holy Spirit, right? You can call it the spirit of history. But I mean, you don't have to. But it's so important to move on from these terms, right? Conceptual churn must overtake. You know, in a way, it is more foundational than the idea of the Holy Spirit, right? Because it is the importance of articulating these things in more and more ways so that we don't get stuck in the word, right? So, but anyway, so the spirit of history, this is similar to what Baudrillard is talking about in terms of turbo. He says turbo capitalism, hilariously enough. But so if negativity is engulfed by the system, if there's no more work of the negative, positivity sabotages itself and its completion. At the height of its hegemony, power cannibalizes itself, and the work of the negative is replaced by an immense work of mourning. That's really interesting. It also ties in here because it's like the angel would like to stay and awaken the dead, right? So in a way, the angel has to mourn. It doesn't get what it wants to do because of the storm of history, right? The turbo. So in terms of what is this turbo, right? The turbo is again, this is getting closer. I'm gonna leave this off here because this is gonna get us into talking about absolute exploit. But what is the absolute end, or what does it Baudrillard say here? Things are being hastened to its definitive end, right? What's the definitive end? Apocatastasis. Sorry. Apocatastasis, right? Apocatastasis, right? And this basically means restoration of creation to a condition of perfection. So it doesn't have to be Christian. I want to make that clear, right? I'm subsuming Christianity, right? Like I'm basically a prophet who is like, I'm subsuming Christianity into my prophecy, right? So it's not that I'm against Christianity or something, but like the people people don't really know what it's about. And I'm going to explain to you what it's about, right? But everybody can have their own totalizing explanation that draws on everything. But anyway, the end that we're hastening to is it's some heavenly noise, right? It's like some shit, like it's very absolute. Of course, there's another way in which this is already the case, right? There is nowhere where we're going. So in that sense, the definitive end is where does that go? It reminds us here. Yeah, this is another thing I wanted to mention anyway, where Baudrillard's talking about exterminate every term, right? So if you think about its absolute end or its definitive end, the end refers to purpose as well as like finality, right? So in terms of this, it's like exterminate, right? So in a way, things will it's the extermination of the world in the sense that it is the innate, like there will be no more terms. It's getting rid of the terms and revealing what is there. And so at the end of the term, you get to see. Anyway, I have a cyclical cosmology, so this is just going to lead to a world to come. And all this is just going to happen again. And we're back to eternal recurrence and Nietzschean affirmation and so on and so forth. But it makes more sense to cover all those things in the next episode. So this has been my introduction to conceptual churn. Again, the idea is we can get so rigidly attached to one way of labeling things that we basically start deceiving ourselves. We overuse this word. We think we know what we're talking about with other people. We think we agree, but in reality, there's a lot of things beneath the surface where we might disagree. That's not the only thing, though. We're leaving beauty. We're leaving a lot of joy on the table because we're not even thinking to explore things that seem like second nature to us. So conceptual churn, feeding off that Jaws, right, creativity exercise, is where we're denying ourselves, our most favorite ways of expressing things in order to be able to put things in a new way and keep from getting stuck on the concept handle or a word itself when we're trying to use words to gesture toward something else and get to a place where we don't have to talk. We can just sing and dance and address emergency in that way, the emergency of joy. And that is back to Svarga. Again, we're going to be tying a lot of this together in our next episode on absolute exploit. So keep your eye out for that. And thanks for paying attention. Oh dear.